Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. We're coming to you live from Consensus by CoinDesk in Austin, Texas. Joining me for the segment, we have Charles Hoskinson. He's a founder of IO Global, and we're going to discuss the different types of applications that blockchain can be used for, not just simply for cryptocurrency. Charles, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Jill, thank you so much for having me on.
One of my favorite topics. We're facing a number of global issues: pandemics, geopolitics, inequality, inequity issues, and governments seem to be acting in silos. What can we do to try to solve this?
Well, the power of the blockchain ecosystem is it's always been finding ways to create trust amongst people who don't trust each other or don't want to work with each other. So when you think of global problems like global warming or ESG concerns, you think of the allocation of resources, equity, these types of things. At the core of these are system issues, and these are system issues where people don't have incentives to work together, but they need to solve those particular types of problems. For example, if you look at the pandemic, if somebody goes harsh on the pandemic and locks down and someone doesn't, well, the person who doesn't has an economic boost from that, but it may result in prolonging the pandemic. So these are examples of where there's incentives to cheat or not participate in the global order. So the power of blockchain technology is that it allows you to reset the global logic in a way where once you agree on the common logic, whatever it is, carbon credits, these things, the entire market can follow it. So there's been a lot of discussions of how do you apply this technology, not just to financial markets where it's been currently applied, but to other things like supply chains, voting systems, medical record systems, and so forth, that ultimately can build up to a better, faster economy that has less friction in global commerce.
If we were to implement global technologies such as blockchain, around governance, and of course, when you think about ESG, it is very subjective. There is no standardized way to measure if these efforts are being worked, not yet anyway.
Right.
And this technology removes the middle person between these agreements. Do you think it'll be more efficient when it comes to governance?
I do, because usually the middle people end up getting co-opted, corrupted, ossified, or non-responsive, and there's always allegations of them being biased towards one party or the other. Anytime you have to trust somebody, usually you're already losing the battle a little bit. So the power of what we think about as an industry is saying, how do you achieve the same ends, but you remove the danger of a middleman? So you're usually removing custodial risk, usually that you're removing a lot of organizational bias. You also have better ways of adding new members. So when you create these organizations, they get to define who's in the club and who's not. When you have a decentralized system, anybody can join, anybody can leave at any time, so they're intrinsically elastic in that respect. And usually what you can do is just by tuning economic parameters, create soft incentives instead of hard incentives. So hard incentives are saying we're going to regulate and create laws, and if you violate that, there's a problem. Soft incentive says you make more money if you do it this particular way. And usually soft incentives tend to work a heck of a lot better than hard things, because hard things, there's regulatory arbitrage. People try to find ways to evade it. Whereas soft things, it's just market being a market. They'll build whatever's necessary. Bitcoin is a great example of that. When I started, mining wasn't an industry at all. When people found out they could make money, now there's thousands of miners everywhere. There's one over there that's in a Connex.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because to your point earlier, we associate blockchain with cryptocurrency, and
Yeah.
I've always thought perhaps it would be more digestible if title insurance or insurance in general was more associated with it first, but then that doesn't offer anyone the incentive of making money, to your point, right? So if blockchain was associated with something else that perhaps wasn't as sexy as making money,
right,
we might not be having this conversation today. So this might be a bit of an existential question, but does it largely rely on the person who's developing this technology when you come back to the conversation of trust? Is there any bias in that?
No, because what ends up happening is the minute that you get use, utility, and adoption, you get a wide variety of core developers. And we have 13 years of history to reflect on in the Bitcoin space, just as an example. And then we have about 40 years of history in the open source movement to reflect on. So some of the initial core developers of Bitcoin, like Mike Hearn and Gavin Andresen and these others, they're gone now. And yet Bitcoin's still here, it's still being built. And it's the same when you look at Linux. It's a very diverse ecosystem. There's more than 800 companies that work on the kernel, and there's tons of things going on at the Linux Foundation. There's 140 projects that they have. So it's one of the few places where Russia, China, Israel, Iran, and America are all doing something together. They're all working on the Linux kernel. Everywhere else they can't talk to each other, but and so that's the principle that you say. You say, well, that type of collaboration seems to work a lot better than Washington. You know, that type of collaboration seems to work a lot better than tech competition or these types of things. So how about we get a lot of social infrastructure in that type of collaboration, because you can move very quickly. The other thing is that there are strong incentives in our industry to solve very hard problems. Problems of how do you vote online? How do you get better identity management systems that don't have waste, fraud, and abuse, or identity theft, or these types of problems? Because we need to solve that to make cryptocurrencies work and usable at scale, but that can be reused for anything. A password-free internet, it could be reused for better supply chain systems. How do you move your medical records around? Like if you're skiing in Aspen, you break your leg, how does your doctor there get your medical records from home? These types of very hard problems can actually be solved using the technology this industry is building.
And Charles, to wrap up here, give me an overview of the critical work that IO Global is focusing on.
Well, we've always been both a research and a development company. So we build blockchains, like we built Cardano, and we've built a lot of other things. But we also do scientific research as well. We've written 140 academic papers in partnership with many universities like Tokyo Tech and University of Edinburgh and so forth. And so we have kind of an agnostic view. So there are certain things in, for example, proof of stake space we do, but we also write papers in the proof of work space. And we try to straddle that middle and predict where the future is going to go and what fundamental scientific problems need to be resolved and engineering problems need to be solved, and then try to find ways to get products deployed there. The angle is banking the unbanked. We care a lot about one universal market where every single person has equal access to the same financial services. We don't want a situation where someone in Senegal has a different marketplace than someone in the United States. And thus we've built a lot of Africa infrastructure. We're in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, we're in Kenya, we're in Zanzibar.
There's a lot going on in the Eastern Horn of Africa in terms of innovation.
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually one of the most exciting markets because it's a place where the regulators are willing to work, the technologists are willing to work, and a lot of people who are very young, they're excited to adopt new things and change things. And there's also a Pan-African view. So they want to create identity, credentials, currencies, all kinds of things across the whole continent, not just an Ethiopian thing or a Kenyan thing or so forth.
Well, I said that was our last question, but I have one more for you. We tend to take a US-centric view.
Yeah.
We have legacy financial assets and institutions. You can even argue Europe is in the same situation as well, but there are billions of people around the world that have adopted these newer technologies, and you could even argue that they're even more innovative than we are in the US, because this is literally the way that they are able to resolve the situation of underbanked and unbanked. And my concern is we don't want to lose that race when it comes to innovation, and I think there's a lot more that we can do here to think more pan-global than just being so US-centric. I mean, we're seeing it here at the conference, the diversity, the geographical representation here.
Yeah, well, it's so cool. You know, I go to a lot of tech conferences, and they tend to have a certain tone and culture about them. You come here and it's extraordinary. You meet people from all over the world. There's so many different languages that are spoken. So it's really the great uniter, and it creates a globalization of prospect. We in America, we do have sometimes a little difficulty understanding that the world doesn't end at our borders.
Right.
And we need to grow up a little bit in that respect. On the other hand, there are some ideals and principles that the United States has that I think should be globalized. You know, our respect for liberty and freedom, our constitutional rights, these types of things. They're a world leader and have always been. And I'd rather see that than China or these other things be aggressively pushed through. So I think it's a mixed bag in that respect, and there has to be some sort of Hegelian synthesis in that respect. And that's what we're doing. We're figuring out how to get it done, and it's all about seeing what we can do with the free markets and private industry, and then where we need to involve some sort of global governance, and that's where we're at. We're in the gangly teens of the industry. We're about 13 years in, so we're just growing up.
All right, Charles, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Very good. I can talk about this.